Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 18th of July of 2024. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Black Sea. The Russian sources published another video how they managed to discover and to destroy the Ukrainian Navy drone that was swimming in the Black Sea trying to hunt and to destroy the Russian military and non-military ships. The Ukrainian attacks took place in the vicinity of Crimea, along Crimea, and attacks in the vicinity of Novorossiysk. As for Crimea, there is nothing special, but as for Novorossiysk, this is the eastern part of the Black Sea, and this territory is considered as the most secured, but now we see that maybe this is not true. Now let's talk about Kherson direction. According to Ukrainians, they left this territory completely. Today, the deep state, the pro-Ukrainian source, published their own post about the situation in this area. The defense forces have left, but the operation on the Dnipro Islands continues. The Ukrainians abandoned the islands, and now there are no more Ukrainians. Maybe some soldiers who were left by the Ukrainians during this retreat process, who knows. But obviously this is very interesting because during the first phase of the battle for Krynki, the Ukrainians were trying to increase the level of pressure, to increase the number of forces they were sending from one bank of the river to another, and we got lots of updates. We got some videos and some examples of how the Ukrainians managed to develop their positions and so on. In the second stage of the Krynki offensive operation, the Ukrainians were just supporting the foothold they managed to establish control over. There were no goal for the Ukrainians in front of Ukrainians to expand the foothold. The main purpose was just to hold the territory they managed to capture. And now the third phase has begun, and during this phase of the battle for Krynki, the Ukrainians are withdrawing from the islands, from the Russian side of the river towards Kherson direction. And this is very important because we need to understand the answer to a simple question: why the Ukrainians decided to finish Krynki operation. Probably the situation in Kharkiv, Sumy, Western Avdiivka, Chasiv Yar, Kupiansk direction are so difficult, so the Ukrainians are forced to send more or less reliable, more or less experienced forces from Kherson direction in these areas. So of course we'll see, and the most important, we'll see whether the Russians are planning to use this situation, because we understand that from now on the Ukrainians doesn't have very powerful defense belt in this area, and the Russians may try to cross Dnipro River from their side and to establish the foothold on the Ukrainian bank of this river. So let's wait. Furthermore, the Ukrainians considers that the Russians are able to do this. Now let's talk about Zaporozhye. During the previous few weeks, we haven't been receiving anything from this area, just the regular updates about some TOS flamethrower strikes, about some artillery strikes, nothing more. But starting of today, starting of 18th of July, we began receiving significant number of updates about clashes in this direction. For now, during the previous 24 hours, we got some geolocations. In the first video, we might see how the Russians discovered the position, probably FPV drone operators, and as a result of strike, that vehicle was destroyed. In this video, we can see the hidden Ukrainian tank that was destroyed by the Russian Lancet strike. In this video, we can see the Ukrainian artillery system that was discovered by the Russians, and as a result of Lancet strike, this artillery system was destroyed. But these are not the most important updates. Today we got very interesting article that was published by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are saying that a new wave of attack on Zaporozhye region. The Russians are preparing for this. They are withdrawing troops from different regions and from Novozovsk and Donetsk. They are moving towards the Zaporozhye region, no longer through Berdyansk or Primorsk. Most often this is the direction Rozovka-Pologi Tokmak, that is closer to the front line. So maybe the Russians do have some plans. Very difficult to understand why the Russians are doing this, or maybe the Russians are trying to force the Ukrainians to keep reinforcements and reserves that Ukrainians are planning to use from Krynki, from Kherson direction somewhere in Kharkiv, but the Russians are trying to force them to keep these reinforcements and reserves in the vicinity of Orekhov and Gulay Pole. Before we start making the video, there was a very interesting report from one of the mappers who is very reliable that the Russians managed to improve their position somewhere in the vicinity of Gulay-Polye. We will discuss this update in the next video, but maybe the Russians do have some plans to attack these two settlements like Gulay-Polye and Orekhov. Now let's move to the South Donetsk direction. We have very important video. If you remember, yesterday we were talking about the Russian attack, how the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt, how they managed to cross so many fields, 3 lines and so many kilometers towards the main supply road TO524. And we were guessing whether the Russians are able to improve their positions or that was just something like mistake or something like crazy insane attack without any purpose, without any goal and without any result. And we were guessing what is going to be next. And today the Ukrainian sources of 61st Mechanized Brigade published another video, the second video of how the Russians were attacking the same tree line. In this video we might see the Russian armored vehicle with the personnel inside were moving towards the tree line. The Russians landed in this area, captured the tree line most likely. Later, a few seconds later, the Russian personnel carrier got on mine and was destroyed. Anyway, this is the second video in a row that confirms Russian control, or at least Russian attempts to establish complete control over this territory. The situation for the Ukrainians is getting worse and worse. Furthermore, according to different mappers, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the main road between Vadiane and Solodka. This is very important as well because, as we discussed, the next thing that the Russians are going to do after taking under control this TO524 road, the Russians would try to improve their positions and to capture the stronghold that is located on the intersections of the roads. So this is the next Russian target, and this is exactly what the Russians have already begun doing. And we have the first updates confirming this. For now, no geolocations, no videos that can confirm this, but at least some mappers give us this piece of news. Now let's move further. We will not talk about Konstantinovka, Novomikhailivka. We haven't received anything special, as well as nothing from Krasnogorovka, but we got significant number of updates from the western Avdiivka direction. First, let's talk about Yevgeniivka. As we can see, we have adjusted the map because this territory was considered as a contested area, because a lot of mappers in the past have already adjusted this territory under control of Russian Federation, the village of Yevgeniivka and the tree lines around. But today we got a few videos, 2 videos in a row. The first video was published in the morning. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking the Russian forces, let's call it in the central part of Yevgeniivka, and based on this video we have adjusted the map and shown just a small gains in the western direction. And today, right before we start making the video, we got another episode of the battle for Yevgeniivka. In this video we can see the Ukrainian Bradley was attacking the Russian positions in the most southwestern part of the village. This video confirms 2 things. First of all, the Russians control and establish complete control over Yevgeniivka. The Ukrainians control the network of the fortifications, you can see them on the video, and the Ukrainians control the tree lines and fields that located to the northwest of the village. So we have adjusted the map accordingly. We have colored Yevgeniivka and we have colored the tree lines in the color of Ukrainian control. So as you can see, the Russians have finished the battle for this village. Most likely the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation will will include this information in the next update, and then we will color this territory completely. Also, as you can see, the Russians continue hunting and destroying the Ukrainian personnel carriers in this direction, trying to force the Ukrainians to suffer significant losses and trying to force them to fall back. As for Novoselovka-Persha, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything that confirms or anything that gives us additional updates about further Russian progress. We have just few FPV drone strikes on Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles that were located in the vicinity of the village. Now let's talk a little bit about Luzovatska-Novoalexandrovka area. During the previous 24 hours, according to different mappers, the Russians improved their positions and captured additional tree line on the way to Timofeevka, and the Russians captured another tree line on the way to Baranovka. So nothing special, just the maintaining of the line of combat contact, shortening the gray zone, probably nothing more. Now let's move further and let's talk about New York and Toretsk agglomeration. We have already discussed this area in the previous update, but before the evening, a few hours ago, we got the first geolocation that confirms Russian control over the northeastern part of the southern New York. In this video, for example, we can see another Russian attack. The Russians were attacking the Ukrainians with significant number of armored vehicles and personnel carriers. The Russian vehicles were moving along the road wave by wave, one unit after another, and the Russians were attacking the farms. The video was published by the Ukrainian sources, so currently we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to, during watching this video, we will not be able to give an answer to the question whether the Russians managed to capture this territory or not. But anyway, I believe that the Russians managed to do this. We have colored this territory as an area under Russian control. We still haven't received anything that can confirm Russian control over the farms that located in the southeastern part of New York. And maybe there are still Ukrainians and the Russians still haven't captured this territory, because this area is well fortified and very difficult to attack. But now we can make a conclusion that most likely the Russians are trying to attack this way and to cut this small artillery pocket from the mainland, either to force the Ukrainians to fall back or to encircle them and to create a small cauldron in the southeastern part of New York. Now let's move to Toretsk agglomeration. We have few videos. The Russians were attacking the Ukrainians in this area, continue attacking. For example, in this video we can see how the Russians destroyed the bridge, one of the bridges that was going from Konstantinovka to Chasiv, not to Chasiv, but to Toretsk and New York itself. This is the bridge that was destroyed, this one, very important one. There are not so many roads and ways how the Ukrainians in this area can be supported. I'll remind you that one of the roads that goes through New York was either captured by the Russians or there are still very heavy clashes. Anyway, the Ukrainians lost their possibilities to use this road safely to support forces in Toretsk. Now another bridge was destroyed, probably during the next few days. If there are more bridges, we're gonna see more videos of how the Russians are destroying them. Let's talk about Zalizne, small settlement that located to the south of Toretsk. The Russians bombed this territory heavily. 3,000 arrived in this area during the previous 24 hours. So the Russians are fighting, the Russians are pushing, and the most important, the Russians are improving their positions. And according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians captured the school number 13. This is very important stronghold and the shelter that the Russians can use for further expanding of their foothold in direction of the coal mine by the name of Artyom, which is very important point, very important stronghold before the further offensive in direction of Toretsk. As for Pivnichna and Druzhba, as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything. Now let's move further. We will skip report from Klishevka and Ivanska because we haven't received anything. And now let's discuss in details the situation for Chasiv Yar once again. The previous video we talked that some Ukrainians, very reliable Ukrainian sources, published the video describing the video with the following words. The Ukrainians managed to discover the concentration of Russian forces inside of this building. Then they provided this information to Ukrainian artillery forces, and Ukrainians start bombing and attacking this territory with everything they have. And as a result of artillery strikes, the Russians suffered significant losses. So this is the description to this video. And we have geolocated everybody probably who is familiar, who's following the special military operation, managed to geolocate locate the building, and this is it. This is the building that is located along Nidobychenko Street in the most central part of central Chasov Yar, which is very weird and very strange. As you can see, we haven't changed the map, and if you follow other mappers who also saw this video, nobody have changed their maps, because it's very difficult to believe that the Russians managed to achieve such a significant progress and such a significant result. But I'll remind you one important and very simple thing. During the previous 2-3 weeks, most of the mappers and we also were talking about Chasov Yar using just a few simple sentences and words. There is operational pause in Chasov Yar. The Russians are bombing this territory heavily. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians didn't make any attempts to cross the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. So everybody was using the same, because everybody didn't know what exactly was happening or have been happening in this area for the previous 3 weeks. And now we see a very important and very big progress that was published by the Ukrainians, and that's why everybody is shocked and nobody knows what to do next. So as for us, we will keep this territory as a gray zone until we get additional updates or some confirmation from more or less reliable sources or mappers. Now let's move further. We have a lot of updates from the line between Kalinovka and Grigorovka. We don't have any videos, but we have some changes on the ground according to different mappers. The Russians managed to establish complete control over the Kalinovka that's located on the Russian side of Seversky Donetsk-Donbass. The Russians captured the farms, these barracks, and the Russians captured additional tree line and the forest on the way to Grigorovka, which is in the area of responsibilities of 56th Motorized Brigade. So you know that this is very interesting because, for example, the Russians, of course, they have the right and they can move further in the northern direction. They can avoid any attacks, let's say, in direction of the central Chasov Yar, but instead they can move further to the north. And for example, if the Russians are able to capture everything that we will mark right now, like this, until, let's say, Minkovka, Golubovka, Privilya, and let's close this polygon somewhere around Zelyznyanska. Let's say if the Russians are able to capture these territories, and telling the truth, it's from perspective of square kilometers, this is a lot, but as for villages, settlements, this is not so much. It's not very big foothold. And if the Russians are able to do this, then the distance between, let's say, possible edge Russian positions and Konstantinov Kramatorsk itself is going to be around 14 kilometers, which is already the distance of artillery fire. And the distance from the same area to the first buildings of Slavyansk is going to be around 17 kilometers, 18 kilometers, which is also nothing when talking about artillery systems and military actions. So the Russians have a lot of possibilities, and furthermore, and the most important, if the Russians are able to move a little bit even further and, let's say, to cross Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal somewhere in the vicinity of Tikhonivka and Malinovka, let's say like this, until Fedorovka Druga, then the Ukrainians will be forced to stretch their forces and reserves along this small pocket, and this can lead to complete defeat of the Ukrainians. So the Russians have a lot of options how to develop their offensive operation during late summer and let's say early autumn military campaign. Now let's talk about Seversk. Also the same story. After a very short operational pause, the Russians resumed their attempts to move from the east to the west, from Zolotarevka, Bilogorovka, Spornaya to the west in direction of Seversk. During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of videos of how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainians. So most likely, we're going to start receiving during the next few days more updates about possible Russian attempts to attack and to capture at least this stronghold, which is still under Ukraine control. And maybe the Russians will begin storming the main hill in this direction, strategical hill in this direction, by the name of Bilagora. As for this point, the highest point on Seversk direction, the Russians have already started bombing this territory, and in this video we can see the stronghold under very heavy Russian fire. Another important update, we have adjusted the map a little bit in the direction of Perezhny according to reports of reliable mappers. Now let's talk about southern Kupiansk direction. The Russians continue bombing and attacking Liman. According to information we have, the Ukrainians moved their command centers and the headquarters inside of this city, and from this area the Ukrainians tried to coordinate and to control the offensive and defense operation along Zhiribets River, in Kremenная Forest, and so on. And the Russians understand everything. They try to find the Ukrainian headquarters and to destroy them. Now let's talk about Makiivka. The Russians captured, or at least we got geolocations that confirms additional progress of the Russian forces in the northern part. During the previous days we got confirmations that the Russians captured the southern part. Now we have confirmations of control of northern part. We still haven't received anything about the central, so during the next few days I believe we're gonna start receiving updates. About northern Kupiansk direction, as you can see, we don't have any updates about additional progress on the ground, but this is not the most important. The most important is that the Russians are super focused in this area with artillery, with aviation bombs, with everything they can use to attack Ukraine positions in a distance. And if we summarize and calculate the number of geolocations from northern Kupiansk direction and to compare this number with any other direction, we can make a conclusion that Kupiansk is the hottest position ever since the beginning of the special military operation. Let's just increase the numbers of updates since the 1st of July, and you're gonna see the real picture in this area. Almost every single square centimeter of this territory was under very heavy Russian fire, with SOS flamethrower systems, with FABs, with drones, with artillery. Every single point, every single shelter, stronghold what was under Russian attack. This updates, the number of these updates confirms that the Russians will attack Kupiansk, and currently this is one of the primary targets for the armed forces of Russian Federation. Now let's move further and let's talk about Kharkiv direction. We haven't received a lot of updates, just few videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces. There are a few important videos. After the Russians destroyed the polygon with significant number of Ukrainians to the southwest of Kharkiv, the Ukrainians decided to change a little bit their doctrine and start moving and start redeployments during the night period of time. But this is not a barrier for the Russians. They managed to discover the concentration or redeployment of significant number of forces during the night, and they attacked this territory. And as a result of attack, as you can see, lots of buildings were destroyed and the Ukrainians suffered significant losses. This territory is under complete Russian control. They try to check and to see everything because they know that Kharkiv direction is very important both for both sides, either for the Russians and for the Ukrainians. As for Volchansk itself, today is the 18th of July, but still we haven't received anything about additional progress, neither from the Russian side nor from the Ukrainian. The situation is complicated. Nobody can get the initiative for full 100%. The initiative sometimes belongs to the Russians, sometimes belongs to the Ukrainians. Sometimes the Russians are able to improve their positions, sometimes the Ukrainians are able to do the same. For example, according to the latest geolocations we have, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions in the village of Staritsa and to capture a few more buildings in the southwestern part of the village, the area that Ukrainians probably are trying to use to counterattack the Russian forces. I'll remind you that just a few days ago we got the video how the Russians destroyed the dam in the same direction, which confirms that Ukrainians concentrated their forces here and probably do have some plans to attack the Russians from this direction in a very near future. Now let's talk about Gluboka. We haven't received lots of updates, just few important things. The Ukrainians from one side managed to improve their positions further in the northern direction. They captured another rich network of the fortifications. On the other hand, the Russians counterattack and also captured some barracks in the same area. So as you can see, there are also very heavy clashes, and nobody, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians, are able to take initiative in their hands. And as we discussed in the previous video, we got report that the Russians during the previous 24 hours, during the previous night, launched a very interesting offensive operation in the northern Sumy area. According to the Ukrainians, the Russians were trying to attack the Ukrainians in Rashkovichi, Sitne, and Chuikovka. The Ukrainians reported that they managed to repel that attack to force the Russians to fall back, but the Ukrainians had some losses. Now let's talk about political events. We have important things. We have some statements from Lavrov. Lavrov said that Russia will be ready to work with any US president chosen by the American people. He also recalled that it was under Trump that the sanctions war against Russia began, but at the same time the dialogue between Moscow and Washington continued. So this is the statement, let's call it, of the enemy of United States of America. But let's take a look what the closest allies of United States of America are saying about the same situation. For example, von der Leyen, when asked about possible work with the less friendly White House under Trump, said that she was going to strengthen European autonomy. So I'm not sure which statement was more friendly to the United States of America, either the Russians one or the European one. Furthermore, as we know, Ursula von der Leyen was re-elected for the second term as the president of European Union Commission. This is a very important position, and as she told us, as she stated, she is going to make Europe stronger. Maybe she's going to make Europe stronger again. Who knows? As for the United States of America, Joe Biden is sick. He's reported about this. People are saying that who is connected to the situation, who knows how the things is going. They said that this is like a way how Joe Biden is planning to take off from the president race, and some people are saying there are rumors that there was real evidence found by the investigators that Joe Biden may, or his people around him, might have some connections with the assassination attempt on the Donald Trump that took place a few days ago. So let's see, of course, what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.